Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We're just waiting for the folks in the waiting room to file in, and then we'll get started shortly with tonight's public engagement session. Just going to give it another 30 or 40 seconds for anybody else who might be on their way in. Okay. Just past 6 now, so I think we'll get started. We will be recording, or we are recording tonight's session. So if you missed something or want to come back to something, or if somebody was unable to attend, it will be posted before the end of the week on the project's webpage on Get Involved Kingston, and we'll share that link in the chat shortly. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the City of Kingston Site Alteration Bylaw General Public Meeting Open House for tonight. My name is Autumn Hume. I'm a communications officer with the City of Kingston, and I will be facilitating tonight's event. So I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on tonight and the City of Kingston is situated on the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. We give thanks to these nations for their care and stewardship over the shared land. We acknowledge that some city processes are shaped by colonialism. We commit as part of this meeting and in any outcomes that flow from it to keep this front of mind and center equity, inclusivity, access, and anti-oppression throughout our work. This session will feature a short presentation about the bylaw, followed by a question and answer opportunity. So microphones and cameras are turned off. And again, just to reiterate, the presentation will be recorded and will be available on the city's YouTube channel as well as the project page. If you do have any questions, any questions about sort of tech issues, you could ask them in the chat, but really the easiest way to solve about 90% of tech problems with Zoom is to leave and come back. You can re-enter using the same link that you would have used to join the meeting in the first place. When we get to the question and answer period, you'll be able to ask your questions through one of two ways. You can either write it down through the Q&A tool, in which case we'll read out the question and one of the project team members will answer it. Or you can raise your hand and we will offer to unmute you and you can ask your question verbally. With the Q&A tool, you can submit your question at any point in time during the presentation, and they just line up for us on the back end and we're able to work through them sequentially. So we do have a fair amount of time set aside to answer questions this evening. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. We work through them sort of in a first come, first answered basis. So I'll work through them as they come in, including those that raise your hand. So if you raise your hand and you're waiting for a little bit, it's just because I'm working through some of the written questions first. So joining us tonight, we have Garrett Hoagie, who's the Manager of Development Engineering. We also have Adam Johnston, who's a project manager with Planning Services, Tim Park, who's Director of Planning Services, and my colleague Amita, who is doing tech support for this evening. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Garrett, and he's going to walk you through the presentation.
Good evening, everyone. As Autumn stated, I'm Garrett Hoagie, Manager for Development Engineering at the City of Kingston, nestled into Planning Services. So just go over a quick agenda for our presentation tonight. We're going to start off with a little bit of introduction, some general changes to the site alteration bylaw, what this means for you as general residents, next steps for this process, and then we'll go through the question period. Next slide, please. So why are we changing the bylaw? So the original site alteration bylaw was enacted in 2008. Since then, there's been no changes that have been made to the bylaw, but we've seen lots of changes within processes internally and to government legislation. In addition to that, we've seen a fair change in development styles over the years that has necessitated a little bit more of a involvement from the city in site alteration generally. Next slide. So The new site alteration process is going to follow a 3 permit process. So there's going to be a minor site alteration permit that will be handled specifically for the pilot program that we're going to be running in the UR4 zone for Redendale. That had its own separate meeting for public information earlier this month. We will entertain questions on this tonight, but we're going to prioritize questions related to the rest of the bylaw to make sure there's ample opportunity for others to get some answers. If there's questions that we aren't able to get to tonight, please feel free to send an email to myself or any of my colleagues, and we can provide you with some answers that you're looking for. So for these minor site alteration permits in this area, they would be applicable to properties that are less than or equal to 1 hectare in size, that are receiving less than 1,000 cubic meters of material over a 12-month period, and they would be subject to a $70 fee and a 1-year term. The other 2 permits in our system will be a major site alteration permit and the stockpiling site alteration permit. So major site alteration will be anything that's not considered a minor site alteration. So you're looking at properties that are over 1,000 cubic meters, a fill over a 12-month period, or that are over 1 hectare in size. These are going to come with a $500 application fee, and the permits will be subject to a 2-year term with an opportunity to extend if required. The other permit, the stockpiling site alteration permit, will be for major site alteration, but for the purposes of stockpiling. So this is for larger development sites where we're looking to stockpile material as either a beneficial reuse site or to be later used on site, and there's just no final plan. So these will require all the same, have the same requirements as a major site alteration, will be subject to a $750 fee, and be applicable for a 5-year term with a possibility for extension. Next slide, please. So we're having some significant changes to our exemptions under the site alteration bylaw. So properties under 1 hectare will not be required to apply for permits, but they will be exempt from applying for permits, but they're going to be made to still establish drainage paths that are on their property. This obviously does not include the UR4 zone for the Redendale area pilot program. Including that, we're removing several exemptions for larger scale site alteration, including the exemption for provincial and federal legislation. So this governs properties that would be subject to, for example, the beneficial reuse site under OREG 40619, which would allow us to permit the properties and get involved from a grading and stormwater aspect, where the ministry might not be reviewing. In addition, where properties previously that have triggered a building permit were fully exempt from the process, they will now be exempt from applying for a permit, but we will facilitate a site alteration process through the building permit application process. Next slide, please. So getting into major site alteration. So like I said, exemptions for provincial and federal legislation are being proposed to be removed. This is going to cause all properties within the city of Kingston that are over the 1 hectare in size and that have 1,000 cubic meters of fill coming in to be subject to the site alteration permit. So they're going to be required to apply, go through a review process that will involve many departments in the city and include a ministry and CRCA review. In addition to the existing requirements for site alteration that we have in the bylaw, we are also adding additional notice requirements, including a notice of complete application that's going to go out to residents within 120 meters of the property so that they're aware of the application and the work that is being proposed in their area. In addition, for the stockpiling, we are going to have some additional measures that can be put in place to help with erosion and sediment controls for long-term storage of materials. Next slide, please. So for the general resident, the changes that we're having in the building permit process are going to follow a similar process that we currently do, which is with all building permits. There is a requirement in section 4.4 of the building bylaw that requires a plot plan to be provided to the city for review and approval, that we will then take and in through the site alteration process, review and give you and approve the plot plan. Once the plot plan is approved, the permit will be issued by the building department for the building itself, and then my team would take over through the site alteration process to ensure that you are complying with the approved plot plan. Once you have your occupancy issued for the property, within 2 months, you'll be required to submit an application for a grading certificate to ensure that your property has been developed in compliance with the plot plan. At which point we would issue a grading certificate that you would be able to keep on file, and that we would keep on file here as a way to make sure that you are maintaining your property correctly. So once those plans have been established, there will be a requirement that you are to make sure that you're maintaining grades on your property. So what does this mean for you? So the site alteration process is going to remain a complaint driven process. We are not going to be like all of our bylaws. We're not going to be driving around looking for infractions. Um, for your general properties that are being subject to the bylaw under a building permit, so your property is under 1 hectare in size, enforcement action will only be taken where there is an active and approved grading plan. So these are properties that have recently underwent construction and have a grading plan that has been reviewed, approved by the city, and then is within the last period of time that they're still current and maintaining grades too. For our enforcement action, obviously it's like we said, it's complaint driven. If an individual is to fill in, let's say, a rear yard or a side yard swale, a neighbor can complain and we would be able to review. And if there is a drainage path being blocked, we can require that they remediate and reconstruct that drainage path. So the next steps for our process, we have a draft bylaw that is available for comment on the website, and that we are going to be waiting for your comments, and changes can be made to the draft bylaw based on these public comments. Consultation closes April 9th, and then we are planning to bring the bylaw to council on May 19th for the first and second reading of the bylaw. Thank you very much. We'll entertain any questions now, and are happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Garrett. As mentioned, if you're looking at the chat, we've just dropped the link to the project there, which has the draft bylaw, which you can comment on. There's also Garrett's email there if a question pops up after tonight's event that you have. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A chat. Is there anybody that has one? Here we go. We've got one coming in. Vicky asks if you could explain the UR4 exemption for Redendale, please.
So the UR4, the application of a UR4 pilot program is coming from a place where we've received many complaints about the drainage issues that are existing in the Redendale neighborhood. It is an attempt to help ensure that site alteration in the Redendale neighborhood is becoming that the site alteration happening there is being done responsibly, and that there's not going to be issues with people dumping their water onto neighboring properties. This is still up for review under the bylaw, and if there's any comments on this, we're happy to receive those.
Thank you. I'm seeing, okay, I've got another question coming in here from Sandra asking if there is an application for a site alteration on a property with natural heritage features like significant woodland or significant wetlands. Will an environmental assessment or wetland OWES evaluation be required?
So the requirement for all major site alteration is that they're to review the effects on environment, including natural heritage. So this is going to be reviewed by our environment team in-house, and we will ensure that permit requirements are applied that are appropriate to the level of natural heritage features that are seen on site, which may include an EIS.
Yeah, if I can maybe just to add to that, Garrett, I think if you go to the draft bylaw and the link that's been provided, you'll see under 6.9, it clearly indicates under 6.9A the effect of major site alteration on the environment, including natural heritage. So those will be things that will be looked at when permits are submitted.
Thank you. Sorry, Tom, I'm not totally understanding the question you have there. If the problem is with UR4, why apply? Oh, sorry, why apply it to the whole city? Okay. So a question about the applicability of the bylaw to the whole city.
So the The bylaw itself is like there's already a site alteration bylaw in place. The site alteration bylaw is not something new to the city. We are just trying to implement it into a different format. The difference between the UR4 zone and what's being applied for the rest of the city is the UR4 zone will be required to undergo a specific permitting process for site alteration taken on their properties. For the rest of the city, if you want to undertake site alteration on your property, you're not going to have to talk to us. Um, you're not going to have to apply for a permit if you are under that minor site alteration definition in the bylaw. The only time we would get involved is if there's a complaint that drainage paths are being blocked, and at that point we would review it from that aspect only.
Thank you. We had a question about how many people are on the panel or on Zoom tonight. So we've got 12 people attending. We had 40 registered, and there are five of us um, on the panel here this evening. Okay. Looking to see if we have any other questions related to the bylaw. I don't see any. I'll give it a couple minutes. We've got one coming in. So Vicky asks, this sounds like it is a little small, sorry, this sounds like it is small for residential owners. Are you going to talk about large sites?
Yeah, so with the application for residential purposes, it is a pretty small application overall. For larger sites, you're gonna be subject to a major site alteration permit as discussed. So that comes with that $500 fee, and then it goes through a major site alteration permit application process. So property owners would be required to apply to us through Dash and meet the minimum requirements for complete application that are identified um, in the bylaw. Once that happens, we will undertake a review through our departments, and like I said, we would involve the MECP and the CRCA, as is generally our process with our site alteration permits that we already have going. Um, the new parts of this is that we are requiring, like I said, that notice and consultation part, where property owners within 120 meters will be provided a notice that the work is being proposed on their neighboring site, and would give them a chance to provide some initial comment on the application.
Thank you. I'll throw it out to see if there's any more questions. And a friendly reminder that tonight is not the only chance to ask questions or leave feedback. As mentioned, this will be open until April 9th. It's currently open right now. So if you need some time to digest the information and come back, we're happy to chat. Perfect. We've got some more questions coming in. So Carrie asks, how is this bylaw related to the provincial excess soil registry?
So the initial bylaw that we have, the original bylaw site alteration bylaw that we have currently has an exemption for work that's being completed under provincial legislation. So that includes beneficial reuse sites under OREG 40619. So for these properties, once they're registered into RIPRA, they would not be required to come in for a permit. In this case, now for these properties that are looking to become a beneficial reuse site, they would be required to apply under the permit process, and we review under the lens and scope of what the ministry doesn't review during their permit application. So looking more at the stormwater grading and those kind of impacts that we see.
Thanks, Garrett. Question from Councillor Osaniak, who asks, what happens if someone undergoes a major alteration but someone doesn't apply for site alteration permit?
So the new bylaw has enforcement action that can be undertaken through the monetary penalty process. So if there is site alteration that's being undertaken without a permit, a stop work order would be issued on the property so that they are to stop work. At that point, fines and penalties could be applied through that process, and then we would look for a compliance with our bylaw. So we would ask for an application, review the application, and then decide if it's something that's going to proceed.
Okay, moving on to one from Vicky. It also sounds like the emphasis is on the impact. Sorry, it also sounds like the emphasis is on the impact on drainage. What about building up a property to create a berm that is unsightly without affecting water
So the bylaw right now does not contemplate what would be like an unsightly alteration. There are requirements that the alteration is to be seeded and sodded so that you're not just looking at a pile of dirt. But at this time, there is not what we would call like height limitations or those kind of items for the site alteration um, bylaw.
Thanks for the questions so far, everybody. Do another call it and see if anybody's sitting on anything they'd like to get answered. Just a question clarifying, when would the site alteration bylaw be active? Sandra is asking.
So our plan is we're aiming for the May 19th council to provide a recommendation to adopt the new bylaw. This would be have its first and second reading on that date of May 19th, and then the third reading would happen on the June 2nd council meeting. And
Would,
for those who are unaware of that process, the three readings is what enacts the bylaw. So once we have that third reading, the bylaw would be considered enacted.
Thanks for that clarity. Okay, I'll do another call for questions, see if anything's come to mind while we've been sitting here on this beautiful evening. It's still beautiful out. There's also an option to ask verbally if you would prefer. I'll just give it a little bit more time to see if anybody has anything they'd like to ask. Do another call for questions. We've got ample time if people have anything they'd like to ask about the site alteration bylaw process, details of the bylaw. We've got one that's just come in again from Vicky, which asks, is there any calculation about how these changes will affect the numbers of permit requests?
We've done a bit of an internal review. I don't have those exact numbers for you tonight, but there is not an expectation that the number of permits is going to be an issue for us to handle based on the way that we are implementing the bylaw. It's hard to identify exactly. It's hard to identify exactly how many site alteration permits we may get when we are currently not. We're currently not asking people to apply, and there might be some alteration happening that we're just not aware of.
Thank you. Got another one from Rose who asks, are people allowed to drain their stormwater onto neighboring properties?
So that is a difficult question to answer that I might not be able to provide right now. That is the ability for people to drain onto an individual neighbor's property is covered under the Drainage Act, and is not something that we're looking at under this bylaw, other than the properties that come in for site alteration bylaw will be required to maintain existing drainage paths and drain to municipal infrastructure where it's available.
Thank you. Vicky asks, what are the penalties for someone who doesn't get a permit? I think we're just searching those up, Vicky.
So the fine is listed under 16.5 of the bylaw. Um, and those that commit offense are liable to a minimum fine of $500 to a maximum fine of $100,000. Um, the fine is kind of up to us whether or not it is applied. It is not necessarily going to be applied in all situations, and it would be a case by case of whether or not it's required. Like all of our bylaw processes, our first opportunity is we want to get compliance, and as long as the property owners are willing to comply, we don't always proceed to administrative penalties if it's not required.
Thanks, Garrett. Another question coming in from Vicky, who asks, has anyone pushed back on the municipality setting a higher standard than other levels of government?
So we've seen a mix of comments on the bylaw. Generally, the most of the comments that we're receiving right now are specifically around the Redendale area. Um, we've undertaken a review that we're going to provide some more information on the report to council of other municipalities that have undertaken a site alteration process that is similar to this. And we find that we are trying to approach a middle ground. There's several municipalities that require full compliance to a permit for all properties, and there's no exemptions. And we're just not going to be taking that step at this time. Um, Even with some of the other areas, we might not be as restrictive as other municipalities. Some we are more, but every municipality is a little different. And then we feel that the bylaw that we have presented and proposed here is something that works well for the situation that we're seeing in the city of Kingston.
Thank you, Garrett. I'm just going to throw it out and see if there's any more questions that people have. Another call for questions. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. I think I'll do one last call for questions and see if there's any other interest. We're seeing people drop off the webinar at this point, and well, uh, question coming in asking what can be done if your property is being flooded. I don't know if we could get some more context. Do you mean coming from a neighboring property or from stormwater challenges on your own property?
So unfortunately, under
Neighbors'
our
stormwater.
existing bylaw, we cannot get involved in neighborhood drainage disputes. It doesn't provide us that ability.
Question clarifying what we mean by hard surfaces. So Ivan asks, I'm in Redendale, and on the last meeting you talked about hard surfaces. Does that just include driveways or patios as well?
Hard surfaces would include patios as well.
Good to clarify. Follow up from Ivan asking about whether there's a formula for that.
So I can speak to that one, Ivan. I mean, the open space requirements are in the zoning bylaw, as well as the limitations for hard surfacing. So it's dictated by the lot size, building setbacks, driveway widths, and such. So it's prescribed on a case by case basis, but in each zone.
And clarification, does that include driveways or not?
Yes, that does include the width of driveways as well.
We've sort of touched on this already, but a bit of a clarification point. So there is no recourse through the city about adjacent property drainage onto your property.
I would say at this time, no, there is not. It tends to be a civil matter. What I think is being proposed in the Redendale pilot project is exactly what it's suggesting, a pilot project, because we do get a fair number of complaints from that area. There's a number of reasons for it. Historically, large lots that had one house on them that have now been subdivided and second houses are going on them, and the lot grading has changed. It is reviewed at the time of the building permit. Um, but when they change the grades, unless it ends up, they sign off, the builder signs off and saying the grade has been met, then if the problems come forward, it comes down to a civil matter because their professional has signed off on the grading.
Okay, so got a few clarifications on this part right here. So wondering, Vicky's wondering, wouldn't there be recourse to the city if the work went ahead without a permit under this bylaw?
Under this bylaw, there would be a recourse if the work required a permit. So there's a general exemption throughout the city um, for properties that are under 1 hectare in size. For properties that are greater than that 1 hectare or have 1,000 cubic meters of fill come in that are requiring a permit, um, we would obviously require them to apply for a permit and then review any kind of remedial work to stop that unauthorized drainage through that permit process. Because of the fact that properties under 1 hectare in size are exempt, we are not able to get involved. Um, where it's a situation that there is a an approved grading plan and they are blocking what could be a rear or side yard swale, we could get involved under the bylaw to ask them to put in those swales back if they're identified on the current grading plan for the property.
Thank you. And another clarification, Ivan asks if I wanted to increase my patio or add a walkway, how do I know if that's allowed?
Okay, so I'd suggest on that one, Ivan, that you would either come in directly to the planning department or phone in and have a sketch or a scheme of what's existing and what you're proposing within the property limits so that we can make the determination if it is meeting or exceeding the coverage requirements.
Please ask us and we'll help you. Okay, I'll do another call out for questions, see if anything's come to mind since. Okay, I'll do one last call out. If anybody's got anything they'd like to ask. And a reminder again that if something crops up, tomorrow morning when you're thinking about this, we've got the information on the website. We've got Garrett's contact info in the chat there and also on the project page. I'm not seeing any other questions or raised hands, so at this time, I'm inclined to end for this evening. There's no issues or concerns with that. Final question coming in from Rose asking, do people require to have a plan to manage their stormwater when they ask to change grading?
So under the new bylaw, if a property is subject to the requirements of a site alteration permit, they would have to come forward with a grading plan for the property that would include identifying key stormwater features to make sure that stormwater is properly being managed.
And sorry to clarify on that, Garrett, that has to be prepared by a qualified professional.
Yes, the grading plans have to be prepared by a professional engineer or an OLS, which is an Ontario land surveyor.
Okay. Last call for questions. Rose is asking about what have they had to do in the past prior to the proposed bylaw change? So a bit of a comparator.
So under the existing bylaw, there is any property that is exempt would not be required, obviously, to provide a grading plan. Any property that would be subject to the site alteration bylaw, which exempts all properties under 1 hectare in size, and any property that's working under provincial or federal legislation would require a site alteration, would require a grading plan again prepared by a PNG or an OLS.
Okay. Well, I think we can wrap here for tonight. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening and for your questions. I'd like to again just reiterate that we have the bylaw available for comment on Get Involved Kingston. We've dropped the link in the chat there. If you haven't been there yet, I'm sure most of you have, but if you have not, please take a look. Feel free to drop comments, questions on that, and if you'd like to reach out to the project team, the contact information is there as well. Again, thank you all for joining us this Wednesday evening and have a great night.